So tonight we're going to be talking about the pyramid of pain. Pyramid pain, for those who aren't familiar, is a model that was kind of come up with a guy named David Bianco, and what it's meant to do is demonstrate the ability to detect and use different types of IOCs or indicators of compromises in your detection capability. So, an IOC, for those who aren't familiar, is anything that's maybe left behind or that's identifiable, kind of like a breadcrumb, that helps you understand either somebody who's trying to attack you or somebody who did attack you. And it can consist of a lot of different data. It's a fairly generic term that just means something that helps you understand the attack, more or less. The pyramid of pain helps you kind of understand how some of those can change over time and which ones are really good and which ones are maybe less good for detecting future attacks. And as we kind of go from bottom to top, they go from very easy to very tough as far as changing them goes. And that's why they become very, very useful. So if we think of like a hash value for a malicious file, so say an attacker is using phishing and they're sending you a PDF, and they want you to open that PDF and it has a malicious link in it or something. The hash value of that PDF is trivially easy to change, right? Like they can add a couple of characters to the PDF, recreate it, and boom, it's a new hash value. So if you take the hash of the file, that's good to know. A lot of us will do that when we're doing analysis of things. We'll check virus total, we'll do all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it can be changed pretty easily. So we're not going to build all of our detections around hash values. IP addresses are pretty easy to change, also, right? They're using a compromised host, they're going through a big public cloud system. If we were to just block every IP address that ever was part of an attack, eventually there'd be very few public IPs that we wouldn't be blocking. So communication would break down as a whole. So again, it's not as easy to change as a hash value, but pretty easy to change. As we start moving up this pyramid, we start going to things like domain names. Now, domain names pretty easy. You can make up a domain name, right? Random set of characters or whatever. It's not very hard to change your domain name. It gets a little harder if you want to use or authentic domains, or if you're taking over someone's pre-existing domain for credibility purposes. That gets a little tougher, but at the end of the day, still pretty easy to change a domain name. So again, if the only thing we're looking for are hash values and domain names, yeah, not so easy, or not so good. It'll be very easy for an attacker to adapt and kind of get past our detections. Where things start getting tricky for the attacker is things like network artifacts. So the things they leave behind on your workstation when they're already there. So registry keys that they maybe have to enter for their tools to work, stuff like that. That gets a little harder for them to change because they kind of have to start adapting their attack methodology. It gets a little more customized each time they're attacking something. It becomes a lot more focused, a bit more energy, a bit more room for error. And then if we take it all the way to the tool level, right? Like what are they actually using to accomplish their attack? That starts getting, a little more challenging. One, if they're using custom developed tools every time, that's a lot of energy. They're only going to be going after a bunch of high value targets at that point. You can't really build a custom application every single time you want to attack someone. So changing your tooling, that's pretty hard as an attacker. That means that if you can get good at looking for specific tooling on your network or different types of malware and things like that, you have a pretty good shot at detecting the attack. But most of all, it's very, very difficult to change your TTPs. So when we think about the techniques, and procedures that attackers use, they don't change it all that often. They're still going to use ransomware, right? They're still going to use phishing. They're still going to use whatever methodology they found successful. It becomes kind of like their fingerprint because you don't want to have to really retrain your whole organization. These aren't like one or two men like teams going after things most of the time. They're larger groups, especially when we start talking ransomware. I mean, you have a whole bunch of employees. It'd be like the equivalent of a business just changing how they do things every time, somebody challenges them. It'd be very hard. There's a lot of room for error. They get caught a lot more often. There's a lot lower ROI because they have to just reinvent themselves more or less. So um, pyramid of pain is a really good thing to kind of keep in mind when you start looking at detections, when you start kind of trying to figure out what's going on or matching things up to APTs. These are the kinds of data that you can rely on, right? You can rely on detecting of TTPs. That's why we talk about MITRE ATT&ck so much. You can rely on kind of searching for tooling. But if you're relying on things like hash values to be like your secret weapon against an attacker, maybe bad idea because it can be changed so easily. But check it out. There's a good article written on it by Dave Bianco. Also, he kind of wrote it out why he came up with the model and things like that. Well worth learning. But have a good night, everyone.